Hi there. Thanks for joining, everyone. If you have connected already, just let me know if you can hear me and see me okay, either in the chat or if you want to go off mute or go on video yourself. See a thumbs up. Perfect. Take a little second. Normally, once I start the meeting, people start pouring in, but took a couple seconds today. So thanks for joining again. And if this is, the second or third or even fourth session that you've joined, thank you so much for attending these sessions. I really enjoy them. I hope you get value out of them. This session is always a little smaller just because we're on another time zone and quite a few people tend to join the first session. So as always, if you have any questions, just go off mute or I'll be monitoring the chat and happy to stop at any point. Last week I had very specific points where I would stop to answer questions, but this one there's not as many kind of pre-planned points. So again, feel free to interrupt me at any time. As Chris said, this session is for the cool kids. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, this week we are talking about my favorite chapter. I love all the chapters, but this one is one that I just think has the biggest delta between what most people know already and the potential that I think in terms of impact that the book can have on people if they utilize it. And so I've been working in marketing for the last couple years, and I just think SEO is so powerful, and we'll get into the specifics of that. But I'll share my screen and we'll jump in. Can you guys hear? There's like a guitarist or something. I think I'm like my neighbor or something. I don't think it's too loud, hopefully. But I'll present. And yeah, as I said, we're talking about search engine optimization. I added a little note here that isn't normally there because yeah, I love SEO. I think it has a lot of potential to help you. Chris said, cannot hear the guitarist. Okay, perfect. Has a lot of potential to help you. It's helped me both with my personal work and also at companies. And just as a refresher, where we are in the book, remember this is kind of the infographic that highlights at a high level what the book covers and how it all integrates with one another. Last week we talked about distribution overall. And last week I tried to highlight that Bedrock channels are maybe not the most attractive channels at first when you're selecting channels, because a lot of people tend to go for viral channels or social channels, but they're very, very important if you are going to build something for the long term and get to new heights, because you can build off of the investment. And I guess the largest channel that you can leverage with these Bedrock channels is Google or search engines. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this slide is, if you remember from chapter 3, there's this codes framework. And again, it's just kind of a framework for a way to think about different channels. And in particular, this is how SEO kind of stacks up across these channels. So we have cost, ownership, dependability, effort, and scalability. And I'll go through them in sequence. So the first one I have cost is green. Some people might actually be surprised to see costs for SEO be green. I want to point out why I highlighted it as green, although you could also say it's yellow. And by the way, green being, that this is really where the channel shines, right? This is a benefit of the channel versus something in red would be, this is where perhaps the channel falls short or is more difficult. SEO is green for cost because yes, you can go hire a link building team. Yes, you can go hire a bunch of freelance writers to write articles for you. But all of these things are not necessarily essential. They're just accelerators. So they help you build up your SEO more quickly, but they aren't necessarily essential for you to do. And for that reason, the point here really is that at a very low cost, you can build up very healthy search engine optimization and your bedrock of organic traffic. And in addition to that, even if you pay writers or you buy links or things like that, all of these are investments for the future versus if you were to compare it to something like paid advertising, you pay for that click and then it's gone, right? It may convert, but you are not really investing those funds into something in the long term. So really, even if you invest in SEO, when you actually kind of back calculate the monetary investment, it ends up being super profitable or ROI positive compared to other channels. The second is ownership. So if you remember, ownership was all about how much do you actually control this channel. Now, Google in particular fits kind of in the mid-range here, because if you compare it to something like Facebook or Twitter, those companies completely own the algorithms, and so does Google, right? Google runs off an algorithm that you can't control, that you can't even like fully understand. But the key difference here is that if you consider most of the social platforms like Facebook or Twitter, their goal is to keep you on Facebook or Twitter, right? So all of the content that you post on Twitter, for the most part, stays on Twitter. The difference here is that Google's purpose, right, or the problem that Google is trying to solve for its users is to actually address their problems and provide them with solutions. And most of the time, the solutions are not on Google's domain, right? It's your article or someone else's article. And for that reason, although you do not own the platform, you don't own the algorithm is in effect directing traffic to something that you do own. So that's why it fits in this middle ground. Now, these first two, I wouldn't actually say are the most important. The most important aspects of SEO are dependability and scalability. So dependability is this concept again, do I know how much traffic I'm going to bring in today versus tomorrow versus 3 weeks versus 3 months versus 3 years? And if you need to have this or in general, you should aim to have dependable traffic. And in order to reach that, you do need to leverage Bedrock channels, and SEO is the best one for this, or one of the best ones to actually build up this dependability, and I'll talk about this a little more in a second. Effort is the main driver in terms of why people don't actually tackle SEO, because it does take time. First of all, if you're ever going to, leverage organic traffic as a channel, you must come in with the expectation that you may not see results for anywhere from weeks to many, many months. But in addition to that, if you're going to build up organic traffic, it does rely on you creating a decent amount of content, a lot of high quality content, and it does take a decent amount of effort versus something like Hacker News may take less instantaneous effort, but again, doesn't have that longevity. Now, scalability is the other kind of duo that I mentioned in terms of what we want to consider with SEO, in that Google is such a large search engine that has so many people going through it every single day that really not only is this channel dependable like a newsletter, it has almost infinite scalability that you can take advantage of. So let's talk about that. This idea of building something for scale, this is just an image from the Visual Capitalist, which shows the relative scale between these social channels, or really the top 100 websites, most of them being social channels like Facebook, Baidu, Twitter, Yahoo, YouTube. And you can see just visually how expansive Google is relative to these others. And just as a couple quick data points, every second, so we just went through 5 seconds in me just saying that, 70,000 searches are made. And every year that amounts to trillions. And our brains are not wired to actually be able to understand what a trillion is. But the point here is that it is massive. And if you can leverage even a fraction of this, you can get pretty far. So in this kind of idea of dependability, scalability, if you want to become big over time, slow and steady wins the race. And if we kind of approach our publications with a goal, this is an arbitrary goal, but imagine this goal is 30,000 page views a day. I'm not there yet. Many other websites aren't there yet. This is a very ambitious goal, but let's say that's our goal. If we wanted to achieve that, you have a couple options. And I'm going to specifically talk to a couple that had to be, more viral channels. The second one is a paid channel. And then we have this Bedrock channel as the outlier. And so the first option, potentially, there's many options, but one of them is that you could try to get to the top of Hacker News every single day. Now, it's hard enough to get to the top of Hacker News once. And so to get to the top every single day is super unlikely. Now, here's another option. You could pay for traffic every single day. Facebook, one of the cheaper paid advertising options, let's say you could get 10-cent clicks, which is pretty cheap, even for Facebook. Well, that would still amount to $1 million plus a year. So really expensive, really unlikely. Now let's talk about this idea of achieving that through search engine optimization. Now, this is still difficult. We want to keep that in mind, but what we get to is actually an achievable path there. So you could start and you could do it 30 articles that bring in 1,000 daily page views a day. That's hard to do. Most organic or most articles will not bring in 1,000 page views a day. But as you start to break this down, you can see how if you put in the effort, if you write a lot of articles that are optimized for a search engine, let's say you write 300 articles over the next 2 years that bring in 100 page views a day, you have gotten to this amazing, incredibly ambitious goal that, again, is extremely unlikely or extremely expensive had you not leveraged the dependable, scalable channel that is Google. All right, let me give you some real life examples. So NerdWallet is a website that I talk about a lot in the book. I call it a billionaire of websites for the reason that it's in the top 3,000 websites in the world in terms of traffic, and there are around 3,000 billionaires in the world. So that just kind of gives you the perspective in terms of really hard to become a kind of monetary billionaire. It's similarly hard to get this amount of traffic that NerdWallet gets. And NerdWallet gets 20 million page views every single month. So really, really impressive. Now, how does it do that? Well, if you look down, I'll kind of jump down to the bottom. It's not through their social channels. NerdWallet, in terms of their Twitter, YouTube, I guess I have this switched around, but Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, they have anywhere from a couple thousand to maybe on Facebook, 100,000 likes, but that doesn't drive 20 million page views in a month. So really the way that they're getting there is, according to SimilarWeb, 85% of their traffic comes from Google search. And something very important to note here is when you bring in traffic through Google search, I've mentioned this before, it's dependable. So if you look at their graph, yes, it fluctuates a little bit, but NerdWallet isn't dependent on, oh God, we really got to get a viral campaign out there this month. In general, no matter what, they're getting around 20 million page views in a given month. Now let me give you a couple other examples. So these are 4 examples, all of sites that I respect, and I think all of these are impressive and great creators behind them. But if you look at these different sites, if I were to ask you to guess which one of these sites actually depends the most on organic traffic, you can normally discern this just from looking at how stable the graph is. So in this case, David Perell's site, marketing examples, again, amazing creators, but you know what? They're not quite at, these millions of page views a month, but that's okay. That's not even my point here. The idea here is that every single month, David Perell doesn't know if he's going to get 50,000 page views or 150,000 page views. Marketing Examples doesn't know if they're going to get 15,000 page views or 100,000 page views. And more importantly, the page views that they get in that given month are dependent on the work that they put in over that month. Versus someone like Neil Patel has deeply invested in SEO. And for that reason, I think some people are outside. Sorry if you guys can hear this background noise. But for that reason, because Neil Patel heavily invested in optimizing his articles for organic traffic over years, that's why he not only has 8 million page views, much higher than anything else on this page, but it's extremely dependable. It hardly changes over time. All right, let me give you a more an example that maybe hits a little closer to home, especially if you're starting out now, because you're like, okay, that's cool that these sites are getting millions of page views, but I'm just starting out. I've got like 3 articles on my site. So here's an example from my blog. So in 2019, I wrote no more than 20 articles. I think it was around 16 articles, but I optimized most, if not all of them, to some degree for SEO. Now, 2020, I have not written that much, took on a new job, bunch of stuff, moved, COVID, of course, bad practice for sure to not be publishing. But the idea here is that if you look, because I had optimized and grown my domain authority and focused on SEO, now, even though I hadn't published at all this year, every single day I get hundreds of people to my site through those articles that I wrote. So again, not a great deal of articles, but still I can count on this based on the work that I did last year. And just as a kind of auxiliary point on this, it comes from a bunch of different articles. So the good thing about SEO, or good or bad to note, is that you're not going to have like one winner. You're not looking for a needle in a haystack here. You're building up these slabs. I like to imagine it as every article that you optimize that brings in organic traffic, it's a slab in your foundation, and you're adding these slabs on top of one another. So you can see here, my clicks and impressions come from all types of articles that I wrote last year. All right, so hopefully the intention of those first slides was to basically say, hey, this is how you might think about the channel, and this is why I think it's an overlooked channel in many cases. And now I'm going to actually get into the nitty-gritty what is SEO and what can you do to improve the search engine optimization of your publication. Okay, so SEO means search engine optimization. Sounds fancy, or if you've never heard of the term, you're like, what the hell is that? What does it really mean? Well, I like to break it down so it doesn't sound so fancy or complicated. It's really just every time someone goes to Google, they have a problem, a micro problem often, but they have a problem, and that comes in the form of a query. Now, Google's job, and the reason Google has become so big relative to other search engines, is that it's trying to find the best solutions to address that problem, and Google is the best at doing it. That's why if you remember back like a decade ago, if you ever tried Yahoo and you type something in and you're like, man, these results suck, like they don't address my problem at all. Google is so much better at giving good solutions for your problems, and that's why Google gets trillions of queries every single year. So that's what search engine optimization starts, by understanding that. Now, the amazing thing about Google is that much of the data that you need to understand in order to rank is actually provided to you with, by Google. And so by that, or through that, you can basically know, A, what people care about, and also B, how to actually address those problems that they're sending to Google. So something to note here is with social, if you're on Twitter, you're not really looking for something, and therefore it's harder to actually say, what does someone on Twitter want? With Google, they're going there directly with a problem. And again, with the data that they are giving Google, you can use that aggregate data to basically understand what content you want to create, or optimize existing content that you've already created so that you can solve their problem. So really, as a summary, learning SEO is just about learning to identify problems that people are, billions of people are sending to Google every year, and learning how to provide viable solutions or valuable solutions. And one very important thing here is, I think I'm not unaware that a lot of people use black hat tactics or kind of gamify SEO. And for that reason, some people are turned off of SEO. But if you can reframe your view and say, I'm going to ignore those things, people can do those things as they wish, but I'm going to focus on using SEO as a tool to understand people's needs and how I can address people's needs, that's when I think you can start to appreciate it and actually say, this is an amazing tool that I can use. And something that I kind of touched on already, but is important, is you have the answers to the test. So with the tools out there today, whether it's Keywords Everywhere, Ahrefs, I'm happy to walk through some of these tools as well later. You can gather so much information. So first, you can identify problems that exist. And if you already have problems that you want to learn more about, you can understand exactly how many people have this problem. So it's the number of searches per month. You can understand whether it's becoming more of a problem over time or less of a problem. You can understand the type of solution that they're looking for through intent, which I'll talk about soon, and also through the results showing up on that page. You can understand, okay, if they care about this problem, what other problems do they care about? You can understand what existing solutions are out there now through what's, again, ranking on that page. And you can understand the competitiveness. How hard is it for me to create a new solution to that problem based on the DA or the domain authority of the pages ranking on that page? So again, there's probably more things outside of these 6 bullet points, but the idea is that you really just have so much information that you can draw on to understand what people are looking for. So SEO done right, as a quick summary before we get a little more nitty gritty, is understanding what a user wants, understanding how people think, leveraging the information that Google is openly sharing with you to create something that is useful for them, and then integrating that into your content, either at the beginning, or you can also do it at the end if you still want to, keep your creative process as it is. Just checking the chat. Okay, cool. You guys can't hear too much of the background noise, which is great. All right, so let's get into some of the really clear, actionable insights. So if you were to try to start learning about SEO, I think one of the limitations for many people is that it can be confusing. And it can be confusing because if you go to a site and you try to say, hey, how do I improve my SEO? You'll normally get to something that looks a little like this. So you'll get to a page that says, hey, there are this many ranking factors, or in this case, 200 ranking factors. And you'll be like, what does anchor text even mean? And, you'll get all of these pieces of data, which do influence the Google algorithm. But because you have this wealth of data, it's hard to action it. right? And especially if you're not an expert, it's hard to even understand what's going on here. And something to keep in mind is that if you do try to tackle any one of these ranking factors too deeply, you probably will lose in terms of SEO, because a lot of people try to gamify the system. But if you just remember this really important insight that Google is just trying to provide users with the most valuable solution to their problems, then what I find sometimes is people try to say, hey, but I keyword optimized my article, or I got a bunch of backlinks, like why is this not working? And it's because these are all indicators for Google, but in the end, what trumps all of this is how a user gets value from your content. And we'll get to more of that later. But the key, if you're going to take all this and you're going to say, okay, Steph, so if I don't actually understand all 200 ranking factors, what do I do? Well, to first understand the Google algorithm, just understand that it is basically trying to ascertain three things. If your site and your particular page is credible, if it is relevant to the query of the searcher, and if it's usable. And to give an analogy, if you were, let's say you live in New York and you're trying to find a good cocktail bar. You cannot go out and test every single cocktail bar in New York and say, oh, that was the right one for me. The same thing is true with Google, where they cannot actually hire people to go read every article that's on their search engine and discern which one is better, which one is worse than another. And for that reason, it needs to use these indicators. It needs to, in some way, take educated guesses, right? And so in this case, to use the cocktail analogy again, if you were looking for a cocktail bar in New York again, you would look to try to figure out if it's credible. So you would see if, either it has reviews online or if any of your friends have been there before. You would also try to see if it's relevant, and relevant to you can mean something a little different with a cocktail bar, but maybe you're looking to see if it has this type of drinks on the menu. So you might check their menu online, and you might look for particular things within that menu, the same way that Google looks for particular types of keywords. You're pattern matching. And then you would also, usability maybe doesn't resonate here as much, but you would maybe do things like check if there's a big line at that time, or when the cocktail bar closes because it's already 9 p.m., for example. So you're trying to understand, again, ascertain if out of all of the options out there, which one is the best. And you're using indicators just like Google is. So in the end, again, Google is just trying to use these different factors as some sort of proxy to understand credibility, relevancy, or usability. And just to give a couple examples that we'll dive into more deeply, for example, backlinks and domain authority, a very commonly used ranking factor, that's really just trying to ascertain, is the site credible? Because every single link to a site from another site is basically that original site saying, hey, this is a micro signal that this site has good information, or it's like a mini vote towards that site. So they're really trying to ascertain credibility with that. With keyword density, again, people go and keyword stuff their articles, but what Google is really trying to do is trying to understand if something is relevant to the query. And the easiest way to do that is to say, this is the query. Does the query exist in the article itself? Yes or no? And then site speed is an example of usability. So is something like mobile friendliness, where in the end, Google still, across all of these other ranking factors, still just wants to make sure that the user is happy, that they're getting what they wanted and their solution is solved. Well, that's very hard to do if, for example, they can't scroll on a page, or it takes 10 seconds for a page to load. And so ultimately, if you were to go and pull up one of those web pages that has, again, 200 ranking factors or so, go through them and actually start to think, what is this ranking factor truly trying to do? Why is Google using this ranking factor? And in almost, if not all cases, you can associate one of those ranking factors with either credibility, relevancy, or usability. So I'm going to talk about each of these three in sequence and what you need to know within each of them. So relevancy, I'm going to start with. So if you're going to take anything away from this presentation, search intent is the most important thing that you can take away, and the most common thing that people get wrong, at least from my experience. So when someone goes to Google, they have a problem again. But the important thing to understand here is often they do not exactly articulate that problem, right? And so, for example, if I wanted to find out how to clean my rug after spilling wine on it, I wouldn't say, hey Google, how do I clean my rug and get red wine out of it? That's how you would maybe communicate it to a person. But we know that Google is so good at reading between the lines that we're often just feeding Google the bare minimum of what we need to tell it. And through that, sometimes as a human, you may not necessarily be able to ascertain what a query means, but Google has so much data again, and it basically uses previous searches to ascertain what someone is really looking for. And this is the whole idea of search intent. What is that person really trying to look for, even though they're not necessarily articulating it exactly? So to give an example, 120 million people every single month search the term apple. Now, are they looking for a picture of an apple? Are they looking for, the definition? Are they looking for nutritional information or to translate the word? Are they actually looking for Apple, the company? Or within Apple, the company, are they looking for the website? Are they looking for the stock ticker? Are they looking for news on the website? There's even more examples, here that someone could actually, the intent behind the term Apple could mean. But again, Google uses previous searches to ascertain what are people really looking for here, at least most of the time. And so Google interprets intent. And in this case, it's hard to see this image, but I'll kind of voice it over. If someone searches the exact term Apple, they're looking most of the time to get to Apple's website. Now, this may sound obvious, but this is exactly what you need to learn, is that intent isn't always obvious. And in this case, again, you may have guessed this, but remember, there are many different versions of what someone might be looking for. And in this case, most of the people are looking for Apple's website. Some other people are actually looking for information, so you can't see this, but Wikipedia's or Apple Inc.'s Wikipedia page is on here as well. There's a couple of news stories. And so understand that your role in choosing the right keywords, because remember, we're in the relevancy section, is not just based on the exact alignment of, I have this keyword in my article, therefore I should rank for that keyword. You need to understand the intent of the user. So within search intent classification, there are 4 moments, and this is actually published on Google. Like, this is on Google's website, this image. There's 4 types of moments. One is apologies for the train. I want to know moments. I want to go moments. I want to do moments, and I want to buy moments. And generally, when someone is going to Google, their problem fits within one of these 4 areas. And what's important is that the solution matches what kind of query the person is actually going to Google for. So each of these relates to what I call, or I didn't make this up, but what people call informational queries for I want to know moments, navigational queries for I want to go moments, transactional queries for I want to do, and commercial for I want to buy. So what's important is that your article needs to match the intent of what's actually resulting on that page. And specifically, we'll get into examples of each of these. If you're writing a long form article, if you're writing a content focused article, that is an informational result. And therefore, you should only be targeting informational queries. Something to quickly keep in mind is SERPs, which is a search engine results page, so what's actually ranking for a particular query, can have ambiguous intent, but this is a minority of searches. And ambiguous intent, all that means is that for some percentage of the people searching for that particular keyword or query, some of them are looking for A and some of them are looking for B. And in some cases, there's more than just 2. Apple is a great example of this, where most people are looking for Apple Inc., but some other people are actually looking for, pictures of apples, for example. So some SERPs have ambiguous intent, but something to really understand here is that a single query, like a single person searching Google, does not have ambiguous intent. It's just the amalgamation of those people for particular queries. But most queries, especially queries with lower search volume, do not have ambiguous intent, and they tend to have very clear intent. All right, so let's talk about a couple examples. So for example, informational, this is what we want to target, especially if we're writing long form content. So informational queries can normally be parsed out into some form of a sentence, like a who, what, when, where, why sentence. So for example, I gave the example of the red wine stained carpet, for example. Here, again, there's no sentence that someone typed into Google, but they're really trying to know, how do I best remove this red wine stain? Or if someone's typing in Archimedes' inventions, they're really trying to say, hey, Google, can you tell me all of Archimedes' inventions, and hopefully tell me it in like a really simple, easy to read way. Now, other types of queries, we won't go through these ones in depth because these are not the types of queries that we want to be targeting. Navigational, someone's really trying to get somewhere. They're either trying to get to Apple's website, or they're trying to get in touch with TransferWise support. They're trying to get to almost like a location on the web. transactional queries are they're trying to do something on the web. So maybe they're trying to convert a file. Maybe they're actually trying to buy something. Now, commercial and transactional, sometimes people get confused because you're like, commercial, that must mean buying. So transactional is when someone's ready to perform the action. So in this case, again, downloading a file, downloading an app, buying something, they're ready to do that action and they just want help to actually do that. Now, commercial is when someone is interested in buying something because e-commerce is so prominent across the web. Commercial is when someone is looking to buy something and they will buy something, but they're looking for more information, whether it's reviews, to compare sites or to compare options, things like that. And then normally someone might convert on the commercial option after research, or they'll typically actually do a final query, which is a transactional query, and then end up buying the thing. And then, as I mentioned, ambiguous. So these are, for example, just to give another example of an ambiguous query, if someone searches indoor plants, are they searching for images of indoor plants? Are they searching for a list of indoor plants? Are they looking to go buy indoor plants? It's unclear. And again, the larger the search volume is for a particular query, the more likely, it's not certain, but the more likely it is that it is an ambiguous query, because again, it's vaguer, right? Or it's more vague, and therefore it's likely that there may be different types of intent within that. But if you're generally, searching things that, let's say, have low thousands of searches a month, it tends to be a pretty clear intent classification. So let me give you a couple examples of some of the things that I just mentioned. So ambiguous intent. So remote work as a query has ambiguous intent, because if you go to the SERP, you will see actually certain results that are informational, certain results that are transactional. So in transactional, they're actually looking to go find a job. They're looking to get hired, versus informational, they're looking to actually, this site from Remote Year is asking what is remote work. They're trying to understand remote work. And then navigational even has some presence on this SERP through people trying to actually get to remote sites, specific sites. And so this is a view from Ahrefs, which is a view of how things ranking on that particular query have changed over time. And excuse me, a good signal for an ambiguous query, again, it's not always true, but a good signal is that something, or the first couple results are changing over time. You'll see certain queries where the same results have been in the top 3 or 4, let's say, for years. And that makes it really clear that Google knows exactly what someone's looking for and exactly the types of results that actually provide value to that problem. If things are changing all the time, that shows you that Google may not actually understand what someone is looking for. And there's, again, variance in terms of what people are finding valuable. So that's not always true, but something that is kind of like an indicator that something may have ambiguous intent. In general, I would also just quickly note, you should try to stay away from keywords that have ambiguous intent, because if Google doesn't know what people are really looking for there, it's hard for you to actually create things that are valuable for people. The other key here is listen to Google. So with every search that you do, Google is telling you exactly what people want. And so, for example, these queries are pretty similar, not super similar, but you have query remote jobs, remote okay, and remote work tips. All 3 of these have different search intent. And again, Google will tell you exactly what it's looking for. So for example, remote jobs, people are looking to find a job. That's transactional. You can see the very first results on this page are jobs. Remote work tips, that's informational. Again, that's the bucket that we want to target. Everything on this page are listicles or long form articles about how to learn to work remotely more effectively. Remote okay is a site that's navigational. Someone searching remote okay is actually looking to get to remote okay. And something really important to note is that the reason I'm specifically saying to target informational queries is because if you try to take an informational article and try to rank it on a transactional, navigational, or commercial query, it will not rank there. Because again, Google has classified this in terms of it knows exactly the type of result that someone is looking for. So for example, even if you created the best overview of Apple's business model, for example, you will never rank on the query Apple, because people searching Apple are looking to get to the Apple website. So that's really important to note. I'm going to skip to this slide and then go back one. But again, listen to Google. And here's an example of where you may think, or actually, I'm going to go here first. Sorry about that. So really, to drill into this idea that Google's telling you exactly what it wants, you can also look to the feed or the results on the page to identify what type of query it is. Google will have these almost like these special sections. You've seen them before. That it only puts in on certain results pages. And generally, these will be also indicators of the type of intent of that particular query. So for example, buy iPhone case. This is a very explicit result that is transactional. Again, someone is ready to buy, in which case it has this modal where someone can actually buy an iPhone right on the page. So another example of this is houseplant terminology is an informational query, and a great way to identify an informational query is this people also ask modal, which shows up and it has adjacent questions. So if you remember, informational queries tend to be able to pretty easily be parsed into a kind of like who, what, when, where, why question. And normally when someone has that questions, there are associated questions or associated informational queries, and they're generally in the section that Google shows. Again, everything I'm saying, there are going to be exceptions, but generally this is true. And so in understanding what type of intent a particular query has, you can basically filter out all these other keywords that you never had a chance to rank on. And again, the reason I said that this is the most important thing that you can take away is because so often I see people, they go and do a lot of things right. So they, for example, they choose a keyword and then they optimize their article well for that keyword. They have a decent domain authority and they're like, Steph, why am I not ranking here? And it's, well, you're trying to rank your article, which is informational, on a navigational query, for example, and that's never going to happen. So you can basically be more effective at selecting the right queries, which is really, really important. And in addition to that, because you can see what's ranking for that query today, you can be more effective in determining what you need to do to actually create content for that query, or create the solution for that query. I want to emphasize that we all like to think that we, have the right intuition and we always know what someone's searching for, but this is an example where that sometimes isn't true. So for example, the two queries, design principles and principled design, you think, oh, those sound so similar, they must be the same intent. In this case, it's not. So principled design is actually a navigational query. There's a firm called Principled Design, and most people searching for this are actually looking for that firm because it's showing up first. So again, trust and listen to what Google is showing you. It's showing you what people want for that particular query. Now, if you flip it just slightly and make it design principles, then it is kind of probably what you would have anticipated, this informational query where everything on this page has, 7 principles of design. What are design principles? This people also ask modal. So keep that in mind and always kind of check your assumptions, because sometimes you will be wrong. The other thing to keep in mind is that another mistake that I tend to see is that people focus too heavily on search volume. Now, search volume is really important to gauge and to balance against, but search volume is not the whole story. So just to give a couple examples, so these are 2 keywords, man's search for meaning and effective leadership. These have basically the same, or pretty much the same search volume. If I were to say, if someone were to present these 2 to me and say, hey, Steph, which one should you write about? Well, if I were to actually do the due diligence of going to these SERPs and assessing them, I would say the one on the right, because this one is clearly an informational query. Again, just to call out some of the same indicators, everything on this page is a long form article. These kind of align with the types of things that I would end up creating. You see this people also ask modal versus something like man's search for meaning does have some informational content on here, but it's an ambiguous query because some people are just looking to buy the book, right? Or get reviews on the book, which would be a commercial query. And so it's really important to actually go check the keyword before you optimize for it to make sure that you're not just checking the search volume, but the intent of that page. And again, in general, not always, but for the most part, the rule of thumb is to stay away from ambiguous queries. All right, so this is going to lead us into the second section, which is about credibility, and it ties in nicely with this idea that, as I said, not all search volume is equal. This is true as it relates to competitiveness as well. And so credibility really comes in the form of your domain authority, and that impacts what actually ranks on a page. And so for that reason, If you just pay attention to search volume, so here's another example where you have the two queries, change is constant and WordPress tutorial for beginners. You have search volume, which is exactly the same in this case, 2,900 searches a month. You normally would say, because the search volume isn't very high, or it's not crazy high, these must be relatively easy to rank on. Well, what I did is pull, if you take the results on each page, the first 4 rankings on each page, put them into Ahrefs and see how many backlinks and referring domains those particular pages have, you get this view, which shows that actually WordPress tutorial for beginners is way harder to rank on. Now you can enter the query itself into Ahrefs and it'll tell you this competitive score, but I wanted to pull these numbers out explicitly to show you what this competitive score actually means. So you see it says 14 here, competitive score versus 64. And underneath this is hard to see, but it basically says, we estimate that you'll need backlinks from 16 websites to rank in the top 10 for this keyword. And that aligns, right? You can see that basically most of the sites on this first page have anywhere from 0 backlinks to around 90, right? And so to rank on the first page, you probably need to be in that zone. Versus this keyword, despite having the exact same search volume, is much harder to rank on because in this case, it says you need around 153 websites to rank in the top 10. So something to keep in mind is, of course, the Google algorithm incorporates a lot of different data. So it's not necessarily, if you don't hit 150, you won't make it to the home page. You can see in some cases here, like this page, which had 3 backlinks versus the others that had more, actually showed up first. So there are different dynamics, but it's important to keep in mind search volume overall is not enough to actually ascertain how competitive something is. It's a signal for sure, but it's not alone enough. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is, in addition to search volume, not all search volume being equal, not all domains are equal either. And so this may sound obvious if you know a lot about SEO, but each domain has a certain domain authority, and that domain authority is based on the referring domains and the backlinks that that domain has built up since its existence. You can also lose backlinks and referring domains over time. You can gain them, and so it's a live metric. So something like Forbes has a much stronger domain authority at 93 than The Hustle, for example, at 78, then compared to mine, 47, and another site I made, Udemy, at 23. And so just in general rule of thumb, if Forbes, The Hustle, and my 2 sites created the same content, exact same article on the exact same, let's say, back end, and the usability was the exact same, Forbes would rank above The Hustle, which would rank above me and my other site. So with all other things equal, domain authority really does indicate where things can rank. And even if things aren't equal, domain authority is a very, very strong factor in the Google algorithm. For this reason, you want to be very reasonable with your targets. So as you're selecting primary keywords for the articles that you're creating, you want to make sure that in general, you're targeting niche keywords. And when I say niche, I'm saying anywhere from the hundreds to low thousands versus broad keywords. And there are many, many reasons for this. So the first reason is, as I mentioned before, the larger search volume you have for a keyword, the more likelihood that it is an ambiguous keyword. And for that reason, it's harder to get the intent right. In addition to that, of course, as you go for broader keywords, you're going to have higher competition, and not just higher competition in terms of the number of things that you're competing with, but most likely the things that you're competing with will be at a higher domain authority. These bigger sites like Forbes or Investopedia or HubSpot are going for these queries. And so the strength of the results is also more competitive. And then finally, this is really important, but sometimes I hear people say something along the lines of, well, this query has 1 million searches a month, and so even if I get like 0.01% of that, that's not so bad. Well, at least in the way that Google or people interact with Google, the click-through rate is kind of exponentially declining. And so the first position gets by far the most clicks, second and third get some, and after that, it really, really tails off. And so for that reason, it doesn't matter if a keyword has 1 million searches a month. If you're ranked 50 for that, or even 100, you're going to get no clicks, basically. And so you're actually better off if you rank first, or at least in the first 3 for many niche keywords, versus ranking 50th for a bunch of large keywords, because ultimately 0 times a million is still 0. Same thing as 0 times a trillion is still 0. So there's really exponential diminishing returns if you go for these big keywords. So be reasonable with your targets, make sure you have the right intent, but also make sure that you're targeting keywords that are within your competitive range. All right, so with that said, I've been talking about optimizing for keywords or selecting keywords. Here's what you actually need to do. You need to select a primary keyword, a single keyword. As people are optimizing their articles, sometimes, this isn't a very common error, but sometimes people optimize for many keywords. That's not what you want to do. You want to choose one single keyword. And that keyword, in order to identify what it is you really think about what problem is the content that you created actually solving. And so, for example, let's say I wrote an article about indoor plants. I created a guide for it. Let's say a long form 3,000 word guide all about indoor plants. I'm an indoor plant expert. Great. So in order to identify the keyword that I actually want to optimize around, I start by saying, what problem am I solving for someone, and how would someone potentially articulate that problem into Google? And so in this case, I might think, okay, someone who's trying to learn about indoor plants, they might search something like indoor plant guide, but they might also search something like top indoor plants, or keeping indoor plants alive, or my plants keep dying. So it doesn't always have to be a question again, or an exact solicitation of something. It can be, for example, people often say to Google things like, my stomach hurts, right? And then Google ascertains what they're really looking for, right? And so you want to, again, consider, what does my solution do, and what is the associated problem? And you can use tools like Ahrefs or Keywords Everywhere to start with one of these potential keywords, and it'll normally give you associated keywords or secondary keywords that give you some room to play around and say, what's the actual best keyword for me, both in terms of alignment with my article and also, if you remember what I said, competitive nature. So again, there's often multiple options, but you want to select one keyword to optimize for. Now, it's not necessarily one word, right? As you can see here, keywords on their own can be multiple words, but one phrase, right? And one quick thing to note is that as you're doing this research and looking at other potential keywords, use this as an opportunity to make your content better. And so this is something that I think is a hugely missed opportunity, especially with like creative geniuses, because they think, I know exactly what people want, and I'm just going to write an article based on what I think people want. And that works out often. But if you actually do this keyword research, so for example, I did this with I think my seed keyword was something like indoor plant guide or something like that. What I ended up getting in terms of the secondary keyword ideas was things like indoor plant identification, do plants like music, plant care sheets, how to grow plants indoors without sunlight, best days to repot plants. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because as you're doing this, you can basically understand, okay, if someone is looking for an indoor plant guide, what are the other things that this person cares about, and start to integrate these into your article. So if I write this article or this indoor plant guide, I maybe want to include a section about whether plants like music. Maybe I want to create like a care sheet or a cheat sheet for it. Maybe I want to talk specifically about low light environments. So this is an opportunity for you to, again, use this amazing data set of trillions of queries to understand what someone is looking for and use that to provide better value to them. Another thing that you can do is, if you are starting out and you actually, some people know exactly what they're trying to write about. They're like, I have all these ideas and I don't need suggestions from Google. That's completely fine. Now, if you're not in that position, you're actually like, no, I would actually like some good ideas, some keywords that I can write towards and optimize towards. And a good way to actually start this is looking at people or websites or blogs. Sorry, I feel like you guys definitely can hear this noise in the background, and I apologize. But starting with these competitors, right? So for example, Brain Pickings. Competitors has this negative connotation to it. I don't mean it in that way. Brain Pickings is a wonderful site that I really admire. And so I could start out and say, I don't know what I want to write about. So I'm going to take Brain Pickings, I'm going to put it into Ahrefs, and I'm going to look at the organic keywords that Maria is ranking for. And I can filter this. So Ahrefs is amazing because this is not sponsored, obviously, but I just think it's a great tool. I can start to filter it based on, maybe I only want to see keywords in this, again, this volume range, where between, let's say, 200 to 5,000. I can also include specific keywords or exclude specific keywords. And in general, I start to get a bunch of ideas for things that she's able to rank on. And then I may consider actually writing about these things myself. Now, one suggestion here is, especially if you're just starting out, try to look for sites that are at a similar or just a little bit higher domain authority to you to do this exercise with. Because if I go and I try to look at all the things that, for example, Forbes is ranking for, they may be able to rank for those keywords, but I may not be able to, right? They may be a highly competitive SERP, and so that's just something to keep in mind here. All right, so then the question becomes, especially if you're first starting out, okay, domain authority is important. How do I grow my domain authority, especially if I have no backlinks currently? Well, I'm not going to go through all of these examples. The book goes through them in a little bit more depth, but there's around 15 or so examples of things that you can do to start building your domain authority up. Because something to keep in mind is that there's almost like this isn't like, Google has never announced this, but from my experience, there tends to be this no man's land, which basically means anything under a 10 or 20-ish domain authority gets ranked almost nowhere, because it's kind of like, if there's a new restaurant and it has 0 reviews, you don't trust it, right? Or if no one's ever told you about it, you don't trust it. And I think there's a level where until you get a certain domain authority, Google doesn't trust your site. And it's not willing to bet on your site, because that's effectively what it's doing when it's testing new articles places. And so you want to do your best to, if you're just starting out, get your domain authority up to at least 10 or 20 domain authority. To get to 10, you need approximately 30 links. So in the book, I say your first exercise, if you're starting out, build 30 links. And one thing to mention, and we can go over this in a little more depth if you guys want, is make sure that they're follow links instead of no follow links. Follow links are kind of the default, but just be sure that you're not building a bunch of no follow links. So among this, or these 15 or so, I want to call out a couple. The first that I want to call out is paying for links. Now I'm calling this one out specifically because you should not do this unless you understand what you're paying for, and also either have been referred to an agency that does this well, or you understand it well enough to vet that, because this is where you can really get into either some hot water by buying links that are actually going to hinder your site, or just blowing your money on something that won't actually end up helping you very much. So that's really important. Don't pay for links unless you understand that practice. I don't pay for links for my own site at all. Some people do it. I'm not looking down upon that, but only do it if you understand how to properly vet a link building agency. Some other things that you can do are you can guest post on other sites, you can do interviews, or you can interview other people. Those tend to bring in links just by nature of people sharing your stuff, or someone actually, for example, if you do an interview somewhere else, they'll link to you in the show notes. If you give any reviews places, let's say, for example, if I love Ghosts and I'm on Ghost website, I should ask them to, hey, please link to, when it says Steph Smith, please link to stephsmith.io. They won't always say yes, but that can be a pretty quick way to get additional links. One in particular I want to call out is Haro. So this is not a sustainable strategy, but at the beginning, if you are looking to build up links, Haro is something called Help a Reporter Out. So reporters go to this site and basically say, hey, I'm a tech reporter. I'm looking for experts on X. And if you're an expert on X, or if you at least know about X, you can basically submit your response. They'll basically do a solicitation for a particular thing. You can submit it. I believe they cap out the character count to pretty low, so it's never like a huge investment. But the thing to note is that your stuff is not guaranteed to get accepted. So there is kind of like a hit rate that I've heard anywhere from like 10% to 50% in terms of like the stuff that you submit getting accepted. However, it can be a way for you to build up high domain authority links. And what I mean by this is most of the time a reporter works for something like The Verge or Forbes or the New York Times, which have high domain authority. And a link from a high domain authority website is worth more than one of a low domain authority website. So it can help you at the beginning, but it's not scalable because it's not something that you can like really do, for months or for years. It's a little bit time consuming. And then the final one I want to mention here, among the others, is this idea of creating almost like a linkable product or solving problems for people. And so, for example, Neil Patel created an SEO checker. That's something that isn't informational in nature, but is something that people will link to, they would share. And Pat from Starter Story did something similar. He created these like how to say no templates. No Mentalist has a fire calculator. Now this one I wanted to call out because this one can pay off really, really well. but it is risky in that it tends to at least take more bandwidth because you're creating like a tool or a calculator or something like that. And it's not guaranteed, right? If people don't find your tool or your kind of linkable product interesting, it won't get any links. However, if it does hit, it can bring in a ton of links, a ton of referring domains. So that's worth mentioning. And then actually, I want to call out one or two more just quickly, that if you create articles that very concretely solve people's problems, so there's kind of articles that vaguely solve people's problems, but there are other ones that are very direct. So to give a couple examples, I created an article about the best Medium publications. That's something that people search for and they want immediately, but it's also the type of thing that people would share and link to. So you can create articles like that, and those tend to get more links than, for example, even though my How to Be Great article is shared widely, or it kind of went viral, that one isn't as acute of a problem and therefore is less likely to get as many links. And then finally, I want to mention that if you are patient, you will get links anyway over time as you create good content. So some people do get kind of come back to me and they say, hey, Steph, like I don't want to build these links. I think I'll get them eventually. You will build up links eventually, especially if you're creating good content that serves people and that people like sharing. Finding or figuring out how to get links at the beginning is just, again, it's accelerating your process so that Google refers to you as credible, and it helps you get organic traffic sooner. So it's not mandatory, but it is something that I would encourage people to consider at the beginning. Another thing that you can do is consider associated problems. So for example, you are writing content for a particular audience. What are the other things that that audience may be searching for? And in this case, you can actually expand past informational type stuff as long as you're still matching up the right type of content with the right type of query. An example is TransferWise. They said, okay, there's probably not that much search volume for something like foreign transaction service, for example. There's probably not that much search volume for that. So there's not that much that we can capture there. But there is a lot of search volume that we can capture for associated queries. So in this case, they found that there was a lot of search volume for these American bank routing numbers, Wells Fargo routing number, Chase, PNC, etc. And so they created the best tool for someone who's actually looking for these routing numbers. And now they're ranking at, in the first 3 for basically all of these routing numbers, some of them which have hundreds of thousands of searches every single month. So you don't have to only think about the very direct thing that your audience wants. You can think about these associated problems that they may encounter. And I believe this is the final section of the credibility section, but I want to mention that there are second chances. And what I mean by this is that when you first start in Google, again, you have a domain authority of 0. The max is 100. Now, it's a live metric that Google is constantly reassessing over time. And so as you build up your domain authority, you become more competitive over time. And Google will retest articles in places that it previously wasn't ranking those articles in. To give 2 examples. The first is my website. I wrote an article about non-technical and remote jobs in like mid 2019, as you can see here. It got pretty much no organic traffic for, somewhere between 6 to 9 months. Then, as I was building up my domain authority throughout that 6 to 9 months, I guess Google recognized that, or started to recognize my site as more of an authority. There may have also been some algorithm changes within that time period, but basically at some later point, Google said, we're going to retest this article on this results page. And since then, it's kind of held steady on that page. So that's something to keep in mind. As you build up your domain authority, you may have previous articles become successes in the future. Another example, this is from calvinrosser.com. He wrote a lot in 2018, and then some in 2019, and not that much, if any, in 2020. When he wrote in 2018, his domain authority was really low. As you can see here, his referring domains were really low. So his organic traffic was also really low, or pretty much 0. 2019, he built up some domain authority, and then 2020 in particular is when he really built up his domain authority and got hundreds of referring domains. And you can see that represented in the organic traffic, where even though he wasn't publishing in 2020, that's really when his organic traffic surged. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, in the last section, I stopped here. So I can see, if any of you have questions, we can also answer additional questions at the end. But I know I just went through a lot in particular about credibility and relevancy. So if you have any questions, ask them in the chat or go off mute. But I can see Dominique's question. Did you update that article or did it just get picked up by Google later on? So it's a great question, and I want to touch on both those points. In this particular example, and I'll just go back to the slide, I did not re-optimize it. Google just picked it up later on. So that's my point about second chances, in that Google, as you build up your domain authority, and something to be realistic about is Google is constantly updating its algorithm, both in kind of like a micro way and in macro ways where there's significant changes, in which case Google will retest your stuff all the time. And you put yourself in a better position if you built up your domain authority during that time, so that Google is more likely to retest your stuff in places. Now, you make up a good point, or you bring up a good point, which is, did you update the article? So this is something that I want to mention that other people should do in certain circumstances. So in particular, if you have this body of content that you've produced perhaps over months or years, and you never optimize it for SEO, you should go back and optimize at least some of that content for SEO. And I want to be very clear, because this is the most common pushback that I get about SEO, where a lot of creators say, well, Steph, I just really don't want to kind of mess with the integrity of my articles or my creative process, and I'm happy with my traffic. And you know what? If you feel that way, fine. I have no problem with that. But my point of view is that you can have those two together, where you can have an extremely creative process that is not ruined or kind of manipulated in any way, and you go and create great content. And then at the end of that process, you go and you ask that question of what I created, is it solving any sort of problem that someone would search for? If the answer is no, I give a couple examples in the book where it's like, I sell onions on the internet, no one's searching for that. Okay, cool. You don't need to SEO optimize that article. But in most cases, people are searching for some iteration of that. So again, I can give a couple examples from my site where I wrote my most popular article, How to Be Great. And I wrote that with no SEO optimization for 99% of that process. I just wrote what I was thinking, what I wanted to articulate. And then at the end I said, is this something that people might be searching for in some form? And I thought about it, and actually there was many forms that they might be searching for it. They may be searching for a query like long-term objectives, or because I talk about that, like thinking in the long term. They may be talking about how do I improve, or how do I stop comparing myself to others, or how to be successful. In the end, among the many, many queries that I could have optimized that article for, I said, what's the closest to what I'm actually trying to convey here? And is this concept of how to be great. And so all I did was include how to be great in the actual title, in the slug, maybe very, very minute changes within the article, but again, not adjusting the integrity of it or impeding on the integrity of it. And that's what I encourage people to do, is to go back and just ask the question, does this actually map out to something that people may be searching for in Google? And all you're doing there is helping Google make that link, that relevancy link, and say, this article, for example, an example I gave last session for the first session of this week was, let's say you wrote an article that was like how to work effectively remotely. It's probably not a concrete keyword in there, but you could just readjust it with pretty much all the same content for the keyword remote work tips, for example. And so that is the reason I'm bringing this up is because Dominique said, did you update that article? And I actually encourage people, if they've already gone through the very, very difficult effort of going and creating amazing content, and especially if you have a large body of content, you likely have a huge opportunity to go back and optimize that content for SEO with just slight tweaks. Some people are having fun with small tweaks, and actually benefit from Google ranking your stuff in places. So I really wanted to emphasize that, because again, I find creators are kind of like allergic to SEO because they feel like that ruins the integrity of their work, and I really don't think that's how it should be viewed. Before we move on to usability, any other questions that I can help answer?
Yeah, I have a question. I just wanted to know, so you showed that obviously you want to try and optimize for one phrase and a primary single keyword, but I was wondering, is there any recommendation on how long that phrase should be?
So the actual length of the keyword in terms of number of words does not matter at all. Obviously, the longer your keyword gets, the more likely it's to be, as people say, a long tail keyword and to have lower search volume. But the reason I say the actual number of keywords doesn't matter, or sorry, the number of words within a keyword doesn't matter, is because what you should be focusing on is the search volume of that keyword, the intent of that keyword, and the competitiveness of that keyword, right? And so you can find, for example, a 4-word keyword that is more competitive, higher search volume than a 2-word keyword. That's, not intuitive and not often the case, but that's why I'm saying the actual number of words doesn't matter. But you want to make sure that, again, if I were to give you very rigid guidelines that you should follow, the things that I would say are, you want to choose a keyword that is somewhere between hundreds to low thousands, especially if you're starting out, no more than that. You want to choose a keyword that is always informational, not in the least bit ambiguous, where it's very, very clear that everything on that page is similar to what you'd be creating. And you want to ideally choose a keyword that also, if you look at the results on that page, the domain authority of the sites on that page are not very competitive. So that's like perfect world. There's always going to be exclusions or things that don't fully fit into that framework. But if I were to, again, just give you like super actionable 3 checklist things, that's what you should care about, not necessarily the length of the keyword itself. Cool. I just want to make sure that addressed your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Sure, no problem. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Okay, usability. So this is a 3rd one. And the reason I put this at the end is because this is kind of like, so people will sometimes ask, okay, Steph, so credibility, relevancy, usability, which one matters the most? They all matter. They're all very essential. But if I were to say one matters the most, it is usability. But it's not usability in the same way that you may perceive usability in terms of exactly how things function on a page. It's this idea of providing a user value and them being able to engage with that value. So this is a hypothetical scenario, but let's say I lost my AirPods somewhere in my home and I say to Google, find AirPods. Now, let's say this is a new query for Google. Remember how I said that Google uses previous searches to ascertain what should be ranking there now? Well, let's say this is a completely new SERP for Google and it doesn't know what should be ranking here. So it's going to start with relevancy and credibility. It's going to start and look for sites that have a decent credibility, that have articles with the term find AirPods in them. Okay. And so it'll start there and it'll start testing stuff. Google's always testing. So let's say I get to the SERP, this new SERP, and I see the following things. So the first thing I see is this map of stores, Apple stores. And I know I'm not looking to go buy AirPods in this idea of finding AirPods. I'm looking to find them in my home because I lost them. So again, Google's trying to ascertain this without knowing at first. And so what happens is I don't click because I'm not looking for that. And if enough people do the same thing, Google will stop ranking that page, or at least rank it further down the page. Or sorry, stop ranking that stop ranking that article or that result on the page, or not rank it at all. Now, if I then kind of scan my eyes down to result number 2, I see an article that says how to find AirPods. And I'm like, that sounds like it's relevant to me. And I click on it. And on this article, I see a list of all the places that maybe I left my AirPods. It's like behind the couch or, in your fridge, I don't know, to shower. And I'm like, okay, that's like maybe vaguely helpful, but that's not really what I'm looking for. And I know there's going to be a better solution to this. So what I do is I don't spend much time on the page and I click the back button. And what happens again is if enough people do this, Google uses engagement data to basically ascertain, look, this didn't solve Steph's problem. Then I click to number 3 and I say, okay, this one says how to find lost AirPods and make them ring. I'm like, okay, this sounds really like what I need. I click on it, but it takes 5 seconds to load, or maybe 10 seconds to load. Now that's not that long, but given where we are in 2020, I know through using Google that there's like 100 other results here. So I'm not going to wait for this shitty page to load. I'm just going to click back. And again, if enough people do that, Google ranks the page lower. Now I click on the 4th result and I see it's how to find lost AirPods with Find My iPhone app. I'm like, okay, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I click it, it loads right away. I spend a couple minutes reading exactly how to do it. I'm, on my iPhone trying to find my AirPods. I find them. Now my problem is solved with that solution. And so instead of clicking back, maybe I close the tab. That's a signal to Google that, look, her search for a solution is complete. Another example of where Google knows that something is complete is that maybe I do click back, or maybe I do open a new tab, but I'm searching for something completely new, completely distinct. So maybe I'm like, okay, I found my AirPods, now like take me to Slack, right? Like I'm ready to start my day, I'm ready to log into Zoom or whatever. And so this is a very clear signal to Google. Steph had her problem solved, and we're going to rank this page higher, again, amongst all of people searching for this, if this happens enough, right? And so this is really important, that among all the ranking factors or things that I'm telling you right now, at the end of the day, over time, Google has increasingly prioritized user engagement metrics, because at the end of the day, that is the best way for Google to ascertain whether someone is actually getting value. So even though all of these, again, maybe even the first 3 had way higher domain authorities, if I click to them and then immediately click back, and enough times that happen, it's going to de-rank them. So at the end of the day, with SEO, you must think from the point of view of the user and what they're trying to achieve. And if you can provide value there, you will get very far with your optimization. So with everything I said, there's really like an 80-20 rule. And I went into this a little bit with the answer to the last question, but remember, Google's trying to ascertain whether your stuff is credible or high quality, relevant specifically to the query at hand, and whether it's usable, whether it's actually providing value to the searcher, and whether they can actually engage with that value. Now, in terms of this 80-20 rule, there are so many things that you can learn about SEO, and if you really want to become an expert here, great. Now, if you really just don't want to become an expert here and you're like, I just want to get the most bang for my buck, here are the things that you should do. So first, you need to make sure that your DA is decent. Again, it'll grow slowly over time, but do that initial step to get it to a decent, or at least like a DA where Google starts even considering you, in which case it needs to be at least double digits. 10 is the absolute minimum, and you really should be aiming for above 10. Once you start to get to like 30, 40 range, that's really when you start to see yourself show up in SERPs more often. So take the time to get some of those referring domains. Now for relevancy, as you're selecting keywords, remember 1 primary keyword per article, and then try to find keywords that are in your range of competitiveness, and remember the right intent, which is informational. And then for usability, make sure your site loads relatively quickly. You don't need to over-optimize all of these things. Just make sure, for example, that your site loads in 2 seconds. If you can load it in 1, even better. But don't try to get your site down to like 0.1 seconds. There's no point in doing that. Now, you can see here just a quick summary: credibility, relevancy, usability. I mentioned most of these things, but remember, choosing the right intent is so crucial, because I've had so many people be like, I did all the right things. And then I'm like, well, you did do all the right things, but you missed the one key thing, which was choosing a keyword with the right intent. So unfortunately, if you choose a keyword with the wrong intent, it does not matter how good your content is, how good your domain authority is, or how well you optimized it or keyword stuffed it. It does not matter. You must choose informational queries. All right. So in summary, and happy to take questions after this, it's really important that you do not ignore the data. The beauty of Google is that it provides you with this data, so don't ignore it. So Google, again, credibility, relevancy, usability. You need all 3. You can't have a site that has a high domain authority with a decent keyword that's completely unusable. Similarly, you cannot have a site that has no domain authority and does the other 2 things well because Google doesn't trust you yet. And then finally, you cannot have a decent domain authority, a relatively usable site, if you're not actually using relevant keywords. So Google can't build that relevancy bridge so that it knows where to rank your articles. So you need all 3. But the great news is that, again, Google's telling you exactly what you need to know. It's telling you exactly what problems people have and exactly how they want them to be solved. So you just need to use that information and integrate it into your process. Now, some people ask about algorithm updates. They can hit, but if you remember what we talked about on one of the previous slides, if you're starting with a user's problem and providing value to them, you are less susceptible, less vulnerable to these algorithm updates, because you're optimizing for the same thing that Google's optimizing for, which is to provide value to the user, the most value to users over time. And that's exactly where people go wrong sometimes, is if they do these black hat techniques and they say, I'm going to go buy a bunch of links, or I'm going to keyword stuff the hell out of this article. You're not focusing on providing more value to the user. you're trying to gamify the indicators that Google uses, and Google is very, very smart. And because at the end of the day, it uses those user engagement metrics, it's going to be like, remember the AirPods example, you're going to be like the first 3 results that end up getting deranked over time. And so really do not think you're smarter than Google. Use Google as a resource. And so just to conclude, I want to say that you're already likely solving many problems that people have with your content. And in many cases, if you have been writing for a long time, you've already created this library of solutions that are solutions to people's existing problems. You just need to do the work to actually get your content in a place that Google can recognize that your solutions are good for these problems. And then Google will start delivering eyeballs or traffic to your content, which will, again, if we go back to the very beginning of this presentation, will bring you bedrock and will actually allow you to succeed, not just today, but into the future, and allow you to reach new heights because you're building this foundation, not searching or not aiming for these surges in traffic that end up disappearing the next day. So that is it in terms of the slides and the content. I have this up here just in case people want. I know some people wanted this in the last session or in previous times I've presented this, but if you want me to go and take your site, look at it in Ahrefs, happy to do that. If you have any questions, I know we had someone yesterday when we did the session who was having trouble choosing a primary keyword for an article, and I just kind of walked her through how I would do that. So if there's any final questions or anyone wants me to do any of kind of this theory that we've gone through live, happy to do so. But if not, also happy to give you all some of your time back.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So you said that, choosing the intent is obviously the most important. And so you want to go for informational. So is it essentially all you do is you go onto just Google and search it yourself and see if they have that, intent indicator box?
Great question. I'm going to go back to the slides just so I can show you, but I can also give you a couple examples live. But so this people also ask box is not always going to be there for informational queries. It's almost like an extra check mark to be like, oh yeah, this is probably informational, but it's not always going to be there. And there are going to be some cases where it is there and it's not informational. But for the most part, it's almost like an extra verification. So don't only look for this. What you want to do is look at the actual results on the page. So if you go to a result, is it a long form article? Is it like a website, right, for a product? Or is it a comparison between 2 products, in which case that's commercial? So you want to just look at if we go back to the different types of moments, look at the results on that page and be like, oh, is this addressing people wanting to know something? Or is it addressing that people wanted to go something and they're there? Or is it that they wanted to do something or buy something, right? And in most cases, if it's a long form article, it's addressing that someone wanted to know something, someone wanted to understand something. So you want to actually look to the results on this page and see what kind of results they are. And again, in general, for informational articles, because we're writing long form articles for publications, you're looking for that in the results on the page. Now, the advice would be different, of course. If, for example, if you're a review site, right? If you are something like a sleep site about mattresses that compares mattresses, then you'd be looking for commercial queries, right? But in our case, we're just looking for long form articles because that's what we're actually creating. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
No problem. Looking at the chat. Thanks, Karina. Thanks for joining. Anything else? No worries if not. Happy to end the session early. Sounds like no other questions, so I'm going to assume that's the case where, yeah, thanks so much for joining again, everyone. I love talking about SEO. I'm sure you could probably get that or guess that based on my passion in this session relative to other sessions. And so, yeah, I hope this is helpful. Really want to emphasize that although SEO can seem like it's gamified, and it is in some cases. If you approach it from the fundamentals and you view it as a tool for you to create more value for your readers and the world, I think it's an amazing thing. And you maybe, let's just quickly to end the session off, really drive back to that original graph from NerdWallet just to show just how much traffic, sorry about this, just how much, 20 million. You can be a billionaire of websites if you focus on organic traffic, and that is basically impossible to do if you focus on viral channels. So thank you so much for listening. Recordings will be sent out. There was a lot of questions in the first session, so if you want to look at the timestamps on YouTube on Monday when this is sent out, please do. And then finally, next week, we'll be talking about monetization if you'd like to join for that. And then the final week will be more of just like a general session for anything left. So thanks so much for joining, and hope to see you all next time. See ya.
Thank you very much, Steph.
Bye.